I am doing my ballet continuing essay, and this particular chapter is called New York, Berlin, Utah. Oh my. I see the pictures of when I was first in Utah, and I am so scary thin. Recovering from 3 bouts of pneumonia is no small feat, especially with the pressures of a new company completing the contracts with the old ones for the Berlin Ballet and just settling into a very different vibe of Utah. Going from Dallas, Texas to New York City was a big leap. Going from New York City to Berlin, an even bigger leap. And while going from Berlin to Utah was a big leap, it was a different frequency of energy in a lot of ways. While the guides clearly told me that this was my place, I was trying to get used to this very different conservative mentality after living in very liberal and highly accepting artistic societies of very big cities. New York City is a place where anything goes. Berlin was a city at the center of the Cold War, but it had a ton of artistry and very avant-garde cultural behaviors that pushed the boundaries and made each of us question many things while living there. Salt Lake City was the hub of the Mormon Church, and that energy was very palpable and obvious in almost every way. It was not a bad energy, quite the contrary. As the Mormon Church clearly controlled many legal patterns and organizations, it was very safe and secure compared to other cities. Yet there was an undercurrent that had a lot of socially acceptable rules, and the mindset had a more traditional approach. New York City was about no rules. It was loud, dirty, and had an air about it that showed the extremes in our society. It had an in-your-face attitude for the good as well as the bad. Berlin was about the Allied forces imposing rules but trying to allow Germany to regain its footing. It was a city intending to not forget the past, but to recreate itself into a very new and modern way for a glorious future. But the conflicts boiled below the surface, and it was clearly a city still healing and mourning. Salt Lake City was founded with a spiritual base and the grandiose potential of the people who traveled to this place in order to follow something that they felt was greater than their own being. This state was like a huge river, but a river that was fed by smaller rivers and creeks. The confluences of many different people created eddies, whirlpools, and whispers of hidden undercurrents that one could not see, but could feel. When I got to Utah, my parents had been so kind to get me a car, a used Dodge, and my 1-bedroom apartment just below South Temple and on 11th East. I was right on a bus run that would take me to the theater if I needed. I was sandwiched right in the area between the University of Utah and the downtown area. It was in an area where the University of Utah student population was also housing. There were students my age in the building and some older people and women who lived there a long time. Right at the beginning, life required me to do something that had never occurred to me in Germany. I had to establish credit. The only way to do that was to go to the bed stores and to buy a bed, as they would allow me to buy a bed on credit and pay monthly so I could establish my own credit and have proof to show creditors that I did pay my bills. I still had some money from working in Berlin, and so with that, I bought a car, got insurance, put the down payments for the apartment and the security deposit down, and bought some furniture. It was all very exciting. I loved my partial basement apartment as it was only half underground and I had windows that did not look out much, but at least I had natural light, and Utah had great natural light. My personal places of comfort are all around caves or dark, quiet places inside the earth. It blocks the psychic noise that I always hear from the cacophony of sounds that seem to constantly bombard my awareness. In that apartment, there were no dead people walking through, which seemed to happen way too much in Berlin for obvious reasons, and the quiet was so peaceful, unlike the sounds of sirens and gunshots going off from New York City. It was soothing to my nervous system, and my bedroom was wonderfully dark. So much can happen when one relaxes one's eyes and stares up into the darkness of a cave-like energy. I remember my mother coming the first time, and she and I were sleeping together in the queen-size bed because there was no other real furniture at that point in the apartment. I was going to sleep when I heard her whisper to me, "Suzanne, Do you see that? I sleepily look at the ceiling where she is pointing and I said, "Oh, those are just the bleeps." "What are bleeps?" she exclaimed. I responded, "I am not completely sure, but I think they are the bubbles of light that are the guides and angels. They are conscious and alive. If you ask them questions, they will talk to you." "Ask questions? How?" she said curiously. I answered, "I like to think of it like a game. I call it red light, green light, yellow light. I ask a question and I say, if it is a yes, flash a green light. If it is a no, flash a red light. And if it is a maybe, flash a yellow light. You will be amazed at how much information you can get just doing that." She spoke softly and said, "Where did you learn that technique?" I said, "When I was a child, one of the guides told me." "What guide?" she questioned. "You remember, that Asian man that played with me in the backyard, the one that I sang songs with." Now, when I was a very small child, I had a great invisible friend that was more my size, and we would play games outside. I remember singing songs in a more Chinese or Japanese style with foreign words. He would make jokes and change the words intentionally, and I would laugh and tell him that he was changing the words to silly words with funny meanings in them. My mother does remember that and wish she had a tape recorder because the words I was using were clearly foreign in origin and that they had musical tones and flows to them. I still remember one song. "Sakura, sakura, yayoi no sora wa miwatasu kaniri, isaya, isaya, mi ni ukan." And so it took years before somebody that was descended from Japanese lineage said, "My grandmother used to sing me a song much like that one. Let's call her and ask her." When we did, she told me that it was a song about cherry blossoms. She said that the song was in Japanese, but that the second half was in a dialect. While it was Japanese, it was a very old form of dialect, and she was unfamiliar with it. I remember how fun that guide was. He was kind, and I felt safe with him as a child. I often was left alone because my sister was dealing with her own issues with my mother, and so I usually escaped to my bedroom or down to the creek and played with my guide. I remember him teaching me that there are many forms of intuition, and that if you can see a guide but have trouble hearing them, play the red light game with him or her. It always seemed to work. So here we are, my mother and I in the bed, and so together we start playing the game, and she was amazed at how easy and clear it was to work with as a tool. She marveled that there seemed to be hundreds of bleeps in the room. That was normal for me. Now I know they are called orbs in the metaphysical community, but as a child, that was my name for them. I still like my name better because they bleeped, little lights. Many years later, I even taught my first husband that technique, and he was a computer geek. He admitted it also worked for him as well. I love the apartment on 11th East. There was an energy about it because it was so close to the ground and it felt stabilizing to me. The people who lived there were very nice and friendly. They were often from other states and had their own learning adventure that they had embarked on. One night late, I was asleep and I wake up suddenly because I hear someone walking on the gravel outside my windows. My bedroom had a large bush in front of that window, but I could see out and see where the living room windows were more exposed and obvious. I see the legs of a man, and he is bending down to use a crowbar on my window to break in. I am stunned. I think, what am I to do? The phone was right next to that window, and I did not want him to get into my apartment. I quickly decided to hit the window hard with the flat of my hands and scare him away from that window. And that does work. He jumps back and seems to run away. I turn on the lights and run into the living room to grab the phone and call 911. Then I also call the owners of the apartments. The police show up and they take a report, and I did not see the face of the man, only his clothing and crowbar. However, the Texas girl in me, she was pissed. I tell the officer in a snit, I wish I'd had my gun, because if he got into my apartment, I would have shot him. Stunned, the police officer exclaims, "What? Wait, you can't do that." I said, "Why the hell not? He was on my property, and that gives me the reason to shoot anyone on my property. I wasn't going to kill him, just wing him." The police officers look at this skinny young woman in front of him and says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Texas." He smiles and says, "Well, you are not in Texas, and the laws are different here. You can't shoot someone on your property. It's not legal here like it is in Texas." Astonished, I said to him, "Then what was I supposed to do?" He said, "In Utah, you would have to wrestle him to the outside sidewalk and pin him there and wait for us to show." I looked at him like he was insane. I was a thin ballerina that could probably incapacitate him with a grand battement to the groin, but I doubted if I could hold him down and wait for the police. Clearly, in my mind, I made a mental note. I was not in Texas anymore.